The Correctional Officer Training Facility in Huntsville, Texas sits 43 miles north of the city center, at the end of a county road that splits a flat, indifferent landscape of scrub oak and red clay. It is October 1977. The time is 11 in the morning. The temperature inside the facility's main demonstration hall is 81 degrees. There are 212 correctional officers seated in metal folding chairs arranged in rows of 14, each man in a gray uniform. Each man there by order of the state. They are not there to be entertained, they are there to learn how to survive. The man who has been brought in to address them is not the man they are watching. The man they are watching stands at the front of the room without a microphone. He is 34 years old. His name is Raymond DeLuca. He is 6 feet and 2 inches tall and weighs 231 pounds without the 3 inches of scar tissue running along his left jawline. He served 11 years in the Huntsville unit itself before his release 14 months prior. During those 11 years he had held control of 2 cell blocks, negotiated 4 separate protection arrangements with rival factions, and survived 1 incident that left 2 other men hospitalized and 1 man permanently unable to use his right hand. He was not invited here. He was allowed here. There is a difference. DeLuca had made a name in certain circles in the months since his release, appearing at security conferences as what one organizer called a reformed insider perspective, a man who understood violence from the inside of it rather than the outside. He spoke in complete sentences. He moved with the particular deliberateness of a man who had learned, in a confined space, that how you crossed a room said more than anything you might say when you arrived. He had been on his feet for 40 minutes when the door at the back of the hall opened. In 7 seconds, in front of 212 men trained to observe human behavior for a living, something would happen that none of them would agree on the details of for decades. But they would all agree on what it meant. Nobody in that hall knew they were about to watch the room change. Raymond DeLuca had not finished what he was saying. He had been explaining, with the authority of a man who had lived it, that martial arts training as it existed in 1977 was essentially useless inside a correctional environment. Too choreographed, too dependent on space and rules. He used those words specifically. He said that any man who had spent real time behind a real door would dismantle a trained martial artist before the martial artist had processed what was happening. He said this with the confidence of a man who had done it, and the room, which had been trained to read men, believed him. The man who had come through the back door was not large. He was 5 feet 10 inches tall and weighed 172 pounds in the dark cotton trousers and plain white shirt he was wearing. He was 37 years old. He had a cap pulled low. He carried nothing. He had arrived 90 minutes early for the second half of the morning session, and had been pointed to a seat in the 3rd row from the back, where he had been sitting quietly for 11 minutes, when DeLuca began his section. He had not introduced himself to anyone. The facility director knew who he was. Nobody else in the room had connected the face to the name yet. His name was Carlos Ray Norris. He had begun martial arts training in 1958. While stationed in South Korea with the United States Air Force, he held black belts in Tang Soo Do, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and Judo. He had founded his own martial art, Chonkuk Do, 4 years prior. He had won the professional middleweight karate championship and held it for 6 consecutive years. He had, in competition and in demonstration, faced men who were larger, faster, and more decorated than Raymond DeLuca in every meaningful category that could be measured. He was sitting in the 3rd row from the back in a plain white shirt, and Raymond DeLuca was pointing at him. DeLuca had been scanning the room for what instructors call a volunteer. It is a particular kind of confidence, the kind that comes from having done something dangerous repeatedly without consequence, that makes a man willing to single out a stranger in a room full of observers. DeLuca pointed and said, in a voice that carried to every row, that he would demonstrate his point using whoever that man in the back happened to be. He said it would take less than 10 seconds. He said the man looked like the kind of person who might know a little about fighting. He said it as a compliment, the way a man says a thing that is not a compliment. The room turned to look. If you want to know what happened next, Make sure you are subscribed and drop a comment below telling us where in the world you are watching from. Chuck Norris did not respond immediately. He reached up with his right hand and removed the cap from his head. He folded it once along the brim. He set it on the empty seat beside him. He stood without using his hands on the armrests. He did not look at the room. He looked at DeLuca. He walked toward the front. He did not walk quickly. The facility director, a man named Harold Briggs who had spent 22 years in Texas Corrections, would later describe what happened in the next 30 seconds of that walk as the moment the room identified itself. He said it started at the front rows, where the senior officers were seated. One man leaned toward another. A name was said quietly. The name moved backward through the chairs the way a change in air pressure moves, not as a sound but as a shift. By the time Chuck Norris had reached the 8th row, the 212 men in that hall had gone completely still. Raymond DeLuca had not yet understood what was happening. He had already lost. He simply did not know it yet. A confrontation is not two men standing across from each other. It is a long negotiation about distance that begins the moment one man decides to look at another. By the time Chuck Norris stopped walking, he had placed himself 11 feet from Raymond DeLuca. Not 12, not 10. 11 feet is outside the range of a committed lunge, by a man of DeLuca's proportions. It is inside the range of a man with Norris's particular combination of speed and extension. It is not an accident. It is a sentence spoken without language. DeLuca extended an arm and gestured at the space between them. He said something. The men in the front rows heard it. He said, "Close enough." What happened in the next 7 seconds was witnessed by 212 men, 4 facility staff members, and 1 journalist from a Houston area corrections trade publication who had been seated against the left wall for the entirety of the morning. None of them would tell the same story, but all of them would agree on the sequence. Second 1. DeLuca moved first. He stepped with his left foot and threw a right-handed strike of the kind that had ended conversations in confined spaces before. It was not a slow strike. The journalist, whose name was Patricia Wen and who had covered the facility for 3 years, said afterward that she did not see the strike leave his hand. She saw only that it did not arrive. Second 2. Norris moved laterally, not backward. The distance between them did not increase. It changed geometry. DeLuca's extended arm passed through empty air at the precise location where Norris's head had been 4/10 of a second earlier. Harold Briggs, seated at a table to the right of the demonstration space, set both hands flat on the table. He did not move them again for the remainder of the exchange. Second 3. Norris's left hand made contact with DeLuca's extended wrist, not a strike, a redirection. The specific quality of the contact was described by a senior officer named Marcus Webb, a former Army combatives instructor seated in the second row, as the way water reroutes around a stone. The force of DeLuca's strike continued. It simply no longer traveled in the direction DeLuca had chosen. DeLuca recovered and set himself. He was a man who had absorbed physical confrontation repeatedly without losing his footing. He found his footing now. He did not make the mistake of assuming the first attempt had been a full picture of what he was dealing with. This is the intelligence that had kept him alive and vertical for 11 years in a place designed to break men. He committed to a second attempt. It was lower, different in angle and faster than the first. It was, by every measure available to the observers in that room, a serious effort. Second 4. Norris did not move his feet. He moved only his upper body, a rotation of perhaps 30 degrees. The second attempt passed to his left. Senior Officer Webb would say, in a deposition taken 18 months later for an unrelated matter in which he was asked about his observations of physical altercations, that he had in that moment understood something about the difference between training and comprehension that he had not understood before. Second 5. Norris moved toward DeLuca, not away. The distance negotiation had concluded. Norris closed to 3 feet in a single step that generated no sound on the concrete floor. There was no warning. There was no wind-up. There was only proximity. Second 6. The room heard a sound. It was not the sound of impact. It was a different sound. The specific intake of 212 people choosing to stop breathing at the same moment. Second 7. Raymond DeLuca was on the floor. He was not there because he had fallen. He was there because a movement had been introduced to his body that gave him no other available option. The movement itself, its origin, its path, its point of conclusion, remained a matter of genuine disagreement among every witness in that hall for as long as any of them were willing to discuss it. The cell block went silent. The whole hall. Chuck Norris stood where he had been standing at the end of second 6. He did not step back. He did not look at the room. He looked at Raymond DeLuca. He waited. The finishing movement had stopped 4 inches from completion. This is not sentiment. It is the specific discipline of a man who has trained to the point where restraint and capability occupy the same space without contradiction. He extended his right hand downward. DeLuca looked at the hand for a moment. Then he reached up and took it. Chuck Norris leaned down once and said something. Only DeLuca heard it. What was said has never been confirmed publicly. One account, reported in a martial arts trade publication in 1981, claimed the words were 4 syllables. Another account, from a man who said he heard it secondhand from a facility staff member, suggested it was a single question rather than a statement. A third account says only that whatever it was, DeLuca nodded once before he was fully on his feet. What happened at the moment DeLuca stood was visible to everyone. He was given a choice that every man in that room understood without being told. He could say what he saw. Or he could say something else. Raymond DeLuca looked at the room. He looked at 212 men who had watched everything. He said in a voice that had returned to its earlier clarity, that he owed those men an adjustment to what he had said before. He said that his understanding of what martial arts training could or could not accomplish had been, as of approximately the last 7 seconds, significantly revised. He said this without looking at the floor. There are 2 kinds of men who lose in front of witnesses. One kind finds an explanation that travels away from the center of what happened. The other kind names the center directly and stands in it. DeLuca stood in it. Marcus Webb told the story in his own dojo for 11 years after that morning. He told it to his students at the beginning of the advanced curriculum, not as a story about Chuck Norris, but as a story about what preparation looks like when it has nowhere left to go but outward. He said the point was not the 7 seconds. He said the point was the 11 years of daily practice that made 7 seconds possible. Harold Briggs mentioned the morning in a memo to the Texas Department of Corrections that October, recommending that similar training sessions be incorporated into the annual curriculum. The memo is in the public record. It does not mention Chuck Norris by name. It mentions a demonstration of applied martial technique that exceeded the facility's previous frame of reference. For a government document, it is unusually direct. Patricia Wynn filed a piece that week. Her editor cut the demonstration section and ran only the policy recommendations. She kept her original notes. She mentioned the morning in a longer article she wrote in 1984 about the evolution of corrections training in Texas. She described it as the quietest 7 seconds she had ever witnessed in a professional setting. DeLuca returned to the conference circuit. He spoke less about what could not work and more about what he had not yet learned to look for. Those who knew him from before said he was not softer. They said he was more specific. Chuck Norris did not speak about the morning publicly. He returned to his seat in the 3rd row from the back after the demonstration was finished. He picked up the folded cap from the empty chair beside him. He placed it back on his head. He remained for the second half of the morning session. He left without drawing attention to his exit. One of the facility staff members, a younger man whose name does not appear in any written record of the event, caught him at the side door as he was leaving. The man reached out and touched his shoulder briefly. The way a person confirms something they want to verify was real. Norris nodded once. He kept walking. The story traveled the way stories of that kind travel. It moved through dojos and locker rooms and the backs of police vehicles and correction officers' training seminars across Texas and then beyond Texas, picking up details it had not started with and shedding details it had. The exact count of observers changed. The duration changed. The nature of the finishing movement was described in as many ways as there were people describing it. What did not change, across every version in every room where it was told, was the silence. Every account, kept the silence exactly as it was, because some things do not need to be translated. The story a man tells about himself in a room full of witnesses is only one version. The room remembers its own. Next week, we will tell the story of the evening in 1974 when Steve McQueen decided to find out, in a parking structure in Burbank with 6 people watching, whether what he had heard about Chuck Norris was accurate. McQueen was not prepared for the answer. That story is already written. Make sure you are here for it.